Alright, I'm going to create this kind of bonus video dealing with degrees and radians and working between the two of them. So let's just start off with degrees, probably the one we're most familiar with. So we know this represents 0 degrees. We know that 90 degrees is there. 180 degrees is a half a circle. If you add another 90 to that, that's 270 degrees. And if you add another 90 to that, we could also say that 360 degrees and 0 degrees are coterminal to each other. So now what do? Well, we can break this up into, and you can see the different markings here. We're going to break this up into the different values here. So we have this one going to here is a 30 degree angle. So you have all these 30 degree angles in each of the quadrants. So those are all your 30s. So 30 away from 180 is 150. 30 away from 180 on the other side is 210. And 30 away from 360 is 330 degrees. So those all represent your 30 degree reference angles. Now we'll take a look at your 60. So here's your 60. So this angle right here is 60 degrees. And so then this one represents 60 degrees. And so that's 60, but we're 60 away from 180, so that's 120 degrees. And then you'll do the same thing on the rest of these. So 60 away from 180 would be 240 degrees. And then 60 away from the 360 would be 300 degrees. So those are your 60 degree reference angles. And then we have one more. And the last one will be the 45. So right here will represent a 45 degree angle. So you have 45, and if you add 45, you're back at 90, and then if you add 45 again, or if you take 45 from 180, that will represent 135 degrees. So that one's in quadrant 2, and then you'll add 45 to 180 and get 225 degrees. And then if you subtract 45 from 360, you will get 315 degrees. So those are all the angles that we need to know for all the trig stuff that we're doing with exact values. So now the next part is to talk about radians. So what we found out was radians, one full rotation, was 2 pi radians. So 0 degrees could be 0 radians, or if you go one full rotation, that's 2 pi radians. So then we kind of broke this up and said, okay, what happens if we divide by 2? Well, that also means that 180 degrees is pi radians. So 180 degrees is pi radians. And then we basically could just keep splitting this up. And so we kind of said, okay, well, what if we divide by 2 again? Well, 180 divided by 2 is 90 degrees. So 90 degrees is pi over 2 radians. So pi over 2 would represent 90 degrees. Well, what if we split this up even further? Or we could go back and say, okay, we have the 180 equals pi over 2. There we go. And what if we take this and divide by, let's say, 3? That would be 60 degrees is equal to pi over 3. So 60 degrees is pi over 3 radians. Okay? And all of your 60s are pi over 3. So if you look at this, this would be 1/3 of pi. So from here to here is 1/3. And then if you go another 60, that's 2/3. So this would be 2 pi over 3 radians. And then if you go another 60, that's 3 pi radians. which would be pi. And then you can keep rotating. So that's 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. Another 60 degrees would be 4/3 pi. Another 60 degrees at 300 would be 5 pi over 3. And if you go another 60, you'll be 6 pi over 3, which is 2 pi. So you can rotate. You can see that. That's 1/3, that's 2/3, 3/3 is pi, 4/3, 5/3, 6/3 is 2 pi. All right? And so we can do the same thing with our 45. So if I take 180 is pi radians, and I divide by 4, I get 45 degrees is equal to pi over 4 radians. So 45 is a fourth of 180. So we got 45. If we add another 45, that would be 2 pi over 4, which is 1/2. You add another 45, that is 3/4 pi, or 3 pi over 4. Then you have 4 pi over 4. And then you go to the next 45, and that would be 5 pi over 4. And then your next one would be 6 pi over 4. And actually 6 pi over 4 reduces to 3 pi over 2. So 270 is 3 pi over 2. And then if you add another 45, a pi over 4, that would be 6 pi over 4, so now we're at 7 pi over 4, and then you'll be at 8 pi over 4, which reduces to 2 pi. And so lastly, now we can look at our 30s. And so if we divide by 6 here, 180 divided by 6 is 30 degrees, is pi over 6. So all your 30 degrees have to do with pi over 6. And so as you work around the circle, this would be 1/6, 2/6, 3/6, but you already have those. Then this is 4/6, which reduces 5/6. So 150 degrees is 5/6 pi. And then you're at 6/6, which is pi. Now you're at 7/6, or 7 pi over 6. And you go all the way around. 8 pi over 6, 9 pi over 6, 10 pi over 6, and then that last one is 11 pi over 6. And then you would go one more, and that would give you 12 pi over 6, which is 2 pi. So those are the conversions of degrees and radians. Once again, we can talk more about this in class, but remember that half of the circle is pi radians. So when you break those into fractions, you're going to break them into really 4 different ones. You're going to break them into 6, 4ths, thirds, and then the quadrantals are halves. Okay, so hopefully that helps with the radians and degrees a little bit more.